Hey everybody, it's Roger. I'm back. I'm the creator of the Azure Sandbox, and I'm gonna refresh the video that I shot for the smoke testing for VNet app because we've made some changes to that configuration. So this new video will cover those changes from a smoke testing perspective. So let's get started. So if we go look at the documentation in GitHub, we're going to pick up here in VNet app with the smoke testing. So there's a couple different aspects to the smoke testing. We're going to take a look at the jump boxes that were, provisioned as part of VNet app, and we're also going to test connectivity to Azure files from both of those jump boxes, both the Windows Server jump box as well as the Ubuntu Linux jump box. So the first thing that we talk about here in the smoke testing is that you need to give Jump Linux 1 some time to complete its configuration. There's no way to track that from the Azure portal because all that's happening internally on Jump Linux 1 using Cloud.ins. So I've waited since I've done my most recent VNet app deployment, so we should be good to go there. So the guidance here for the smoke testing is to log in to Jump Linux 1 and check to see whether or not Cloud.ins is complete. So let's do that. We'll come over here to virtual machines, and we can see we've got Jump Linux 1 here that's successfully provisioned. And I'm going to go ahead and connect to that using Bastion. And we're going to use an SSH private key from Key Vault to authenticate. And the account we're going to use to connect is Bootstrap admin, which is the default administrative account that we set up as part of the sandbox, but we're going to tag on local to that. That's the new bit. We're actually creating a dedicated local account as well as an account for Active Directory. So we're going to use the dedicated local user account here to do this phase of the smoke testing. So we're going to get our SSH private key from Key Vault. So we'll pick the Key Vault that we provisioned as part of the sandbox. And we're going to choose this secret Bootstrap admin SSH key private. And then for added security, we put a passphrase in there. So that's just the standard admin password, which we can get from Key Vault. So I'll paste that in and we'll connect. I'll go ahead and click on allow here to allow copy paste. And we've successfully created an SSH connection to that local administrative account. So I think the first thing that the smoke testing instruction asks us to do is to do a cloud init status to see whether cloud init's done, and it is. So that's good. So we know all the configuration's complete. And then I think it also asks us to go and have a look at the cloud init config file, which we'll do. So, or sorry, the log file for cloud init. So this kind of just gives you a flavor for how much cloud init is doing to get that Jump Linux 1 jump box in shape for us to use. So we'll just quickly tool through that, see all the different updates that are happening, all the packages that are getting installed, and the reboots that happen. This is all work that's being done in an automated fashion by Cloud.ins instead of you having to do it yourself manually. So that's good stuff. And there's, as you can see, quite a bit here. So you can see at this point, we can see some messages in the log saying that a restart is required. So the restart happens and the machine wakes back up again. And once the restart happens, Cloud init finishes its configuration and it goes into its final stage where it runs some user scripts. So one of those user scripts installs the Azure PowerShell CMD module, and then another runs a script that configures the jump box by joining it to Active Directory and setting up connectivity and auto mounting of Azure files. So that all looks to have completed successfully. I'm not seeing any errors in the log here. So we'll call that part of the smoke testing done. So we'll go ahead and log out of here. And the next part of the smoke testing is to check that the node configuration for jump win1 is compliant. So we use Azure Automation desired state configuration to configure our Windows Server jump box. So we'll go have a look at our automation account, and specifically this section under configuration management here that says state configuration DSC. You can see that we have two compliant nodes. The new one listed here is jump win1. That's what we're using Azure Automation desired state configuration to configure, and it shows here compliant. We can drill into that and get some more details on the consistency checks that are being performed. And one of these will actually show each of the different desired state configuration components that were installed on the computer. So I'm just going to tool through these until we find that one. I think it's probably the second one here. Yep, here it is. So this shows the different desired state configuration resources that were automatically configured on Windows Server. It was domain joined. We added some Windows features. We created some Active Directory groups. We created the Chocolatey package installer, and then we actually installed a bunch of software using Chocolatey, including everything that's listed in this list. So that's looking pretty good. Our Windows Server jump box configuration and our Linux jump box configurations appear to be in good shape according to what we're expecting. So that completes that portion of the smoke testing. So the next bit is where we log into jump win1 and test connectivity to that. So we'll come over here to virtual machines. We'll pull open jump win1 and we'll connect using Bastion. And the user account that we're going to use is going to be a domain account this time. It's actually the domain administrator. It's bootstrap admin at mysandbox.local is the user account we're going to use to connect. And we're going to get the password from Key Vault. So I'll open up Key Vault here and we'll grab the admin password and we'll go ahead and connect. So we're just going to prepare the environment here a little bit for the smoke testing. Since this is the first boot of this machine and the first time a user is logged into it, we'll just clean a few things up. It takes the machine a little bit to boot, but here it's coming up now. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll get rid of Server Manager because we're not going to be using that too much. And I'll go ahead and close out of that. And then I also like to, I don't think this is in the smoke testing instructions, but I like to enable viewing file extensions. So we'll turn that on in File Explorer. And then once we've successfully connected, the next thing it wants us to do is go check Active Directory users and computers and make sure things look okay there. So those administrative tools are installed here by default. So if I go into Windows Administrative Tools, you can see Active Directory users and computers. And the things that we want to check from a smoke testing perspective are in this mysandbox.local domain. We want to make sure that the storage account was was joined. This basically makes it possible to use Kerberos authentication to connect to Azure Storage and Azure Files. So that's the name of our storage account. So it has been successfully joined to our Active Directory domain services domain. Then we can also see here our domain controller that was previously provisioned shows up as our domain controller. That's ADDS1. And we have two computers here listed for our two jump boxes, Jump Win 1, Jump Linux 1. So that's all looking pretty well. And I think the smoke testing wants us as well to check out DNS. So if I pop open DNS, the DNS server is the same machine that's our domain controller. We're running Active Directory Domain Services Integrated DNS. So if I pop that open, we can see a few things have been configured for us on that DNS server. First of all, if we double click on forwarders here, we could see that we've set up a forwarder to forward any DNS queries that we can't resolve onto Azure DNS, which is what this IP address here is used for. So that's configured correctly. And if we go into forward lookup zones, into mysandbox.local, we could see A records for all of our VMs. We have an A record here for our domain controller. We have an A record for this machine, Jump Win 1, and we have an A record for Jump Linux 1. So all those machines have been properly registered with DNS, and DNS queries should work well with that. So that's looking pretty good. Let's have a look at what other smoke testing we want to do here. Okay, now what we're going to do is, a lot of people use the sandbox to set up some, development capabilities in Azure, and Jump Win 1 can be used for that because a lot of developer tools are pre-installed on it, and it can also be used as a development environment for Linux solutions that are hosted on Jump Linux 1 and other Linux machines. So we're going to basically use Visual Studio Code to set up remote development against Jump Linux 1 from Jump Win 1. So let's do that next. So if I launch Visual Studio Code, it'll take it a minute to come up for the first time. We're going to need to connect to a remote system. So we're going to come down here and click on this open a remote window section in VS Code. And the first thing we'll do is tell it that we want to open a remote window using SSH. So that actually installs the SSH extension, and then it automatically gives us the ability to add a new SSH host. So we'll go ahead and add an SSH host for Jump Linux 1. So we're going to use Active Directory Domain Services credentials to connect. So the SSH command that will be used will be SSH bootstrap admin at mysandbox.local at Jump Linux 1. So we're using an Active Directory account that is been created already on Jump Linux 1 using the Linux WinBind package. And that allows us to connect using our domain credentials as opposed to using that local account that was created that we used initially to log in to Jump Linux 1. So that's my command. That looks pretty good. I'm going to store that information in my config file here. So all we've done is configure that potential SSH connection. We actually haven't tried to connect yet. So to do that, I'm going to click on Open a Remote Window again. I'm going to choose Connect to Host. And here now we can see Jump Linux 1 is listed as one of our hosts. So I'll click on that. And that will actually open up a new VS Code window. So I'll maximize that. And we'll choose Linux as the platform that we're trying to connect to. And we're going to confirm that the fingerprint for Jump Linux 1, that we trust that. And now we're going to need the password to log in. So I'll grab that from Key Vault. And we'll paste that in here. And you can see the messages where it's setting up. Now we have a connection to Jump Linux 1 from VS Code on Jump Win 1. So we might actually want to browse some files and stuff too. So I'll click on Explorer here, and I'll click on Open Folder. And we'll just take the default, which will be the home directory for Bootstrap Admin. And it's going to probably want the password again. So I'm prompted for that. I've already got that in my clipboard, so I'll just paste that back in. And I'll go ahead and enable trust on those folders. And here we are. We can see the view of our home directory here over on the left and all the files that are in it. And if I go up here to view, I can enable a bash terminal. So I'll just say view terminal. And here we have a nice bash session with Jump Linux 1 that we can use to run bash commands remotely on Jump Linux 1, which is pretty cool. So we'll just do a few things here. We'll check the version of the Azure CLI that's pre-installed with AZ-version. So that proves that Cloud Init successfully installed and configured the Azure CLI. I think we also installed PowerShell. So we'll do a pwsh version. So PowerShell's installed on Jump Linux 1 as well. And I believe we also installed Terraform. Cool. And I think those are all the checks that the smoke testing asked us to use. Let's see if there are any others. Oh yeah, it just wants you to see like what version of Linux and stuff you're running. So we'll run this command. So this particular build is Ubuntu 22.04.03, and that's a long-term support release that's known as Jammy Jellyfish, which is the most recent as the time of this publishing. So that kind of tells you what type of Linux host you're working with. So here we have a full remote development environment enabled from Visual Studio Code running on Jump Win 1, talking remotely using SSH to Jump Linux 1, and we've used Active Directory domain services credentials to authenticate. So that completes that portion of the smoke testing. So now we're going to move to doing some Azure Files smoke testing. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is check to see whether we can resolve DNS queries to the Azure Files private endpoint that was configured. So to do that, there's a couple ways to get the fully qualified domain name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up into our storage accounts here. And here's our storage account that was configured. And I'm going to go into File Shares. There's my Azure Files share that we configured called My File Share. And if I double click on that, you can see over here we get a whole share URL. So that's the full URI for the Azure Files endpoint if you're using the API to connect. And pretty much all the information that we need to use to connect to Azure Files is contained in that URI. So I'll throw that in the clipboard, and then let's go run some DNS queries. So I'll minimize on Jump Win 1. So I'll minimize VS Code. We can close this instance. We'll leave the other instance running. That's the remote development session against Jump Linux 1. And I'm going to open up a PowerShell command prompt, and we'll do a resolve-DNS name, and we'll paste in that URI that we copied. Now, we're not going to need all of this. All we need is the fully qualified domain name portion. So I'll get rid of the share name, and I'll get rid of the HTTPS, and we'll see if this DNS query resolves. And it does. And it resolves using private link, and it resolves using the private endpoint that we have configured to communicate with Azure Files, which is sitting in that private link subnet, which is a 10.2.2 address space. So that is working as expected. I'm getting a private IP address back, which has been properly returned using a DNS query, to my client. So that's good stuff. Now that I know the DNS queries can work, I can actually map a drive. So let's do a net use, and we'll map it to our Z drive, and I'll paste in that same stuff from the URI, but we'll clean it up so that it works with the net use command. So we'll get rid of all this HTTPS stuff. So it leads with a double backslash, and Windows uses backslashes instead of forward slashes. So we'll put a backslash between the fully qualified domain name of the Azure Files endpoint and the actual name of the file share. I don't need to specify any credentials because we're going to use Kerberos authentication to connect using my Active Directory domain services credentials, which is bootstrap admin at mysandbox.local. So we'll hit enter there, and boom. My file share has been mounted to the D drive. So if we open up File Explorer, we can go see, look, we've got a Z drive connected. So let's go create a temp folder there in Azure Files. And I'll create a text file. And we'll call it hello world.jumpwin1.txt. And we'll put some content in that file. Hello world from JumpWin1. Okay, so we've got a test directory, we've got a test file in there. Now what we want to do is go see if we can get to that same file share from the Linux jump box. So remember, we already have a connection to the Linux jump box running in VS Code right here. So if I've got from my terminal down here, if I go and I do a list of file shares, my file share, that's where I auto mount that same Azure file share from my Linux box. And voila, there it is. So if we go look at the temp directory, there's the hello world file that we just created. And I can cat that file. So we'll just change this to a cat and add the file name to the end. Hello world from JumpWin1. So that's the text file we created on JumpWin1. So let's create a text file from here as well. We'll do an echo hello world from Jump Linux 1. And we'll send that to file shares, my file share, temp, hello world.jumplinux1.txt. So that worked. And if we go back over to our Jump Win1 in File Explorer, look, there's the file we just created. Hello world from Jump Linux 1. So now we can share files back and forth between our Windows jump box and our Linux jump box. We can do remote development. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that completes all of the smoke testing. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next video.